Beyond two dimensions in Adobe Illustrator and looking at a couple of ways you can work in 3D, or it's all still vectors, but at least the appearance of 3D. And the first is the perspective grid, and there are a couple of ways to get there. One is I can go to, got to be in Illustrator, View, Perspective Grid, and I can click on that and just turn it on. But the trouble is that that's going to give me the grid, but it's not going to give me all the tools I want to work with the grid. So I'm going to go another way. Since the 2019 release of Adobe Illustrator, they have been offering a pared down interface. If you look at these tools here, these are probably the ones most people use most often, but Illustrator offers you just a shit ton of other tools that you can turn to, but they're just a little bit hidden. And so if we click on the bottom of our tool menu and I go to the drop down menu, here's just a bunch of the tools, and I have a few third-party extensions, so I even have some extra ones, but I'm not going to worry about all of those right now. What I'm going to do is go to the drop down menu and I'm going to change my tools to advanced. And that's going to give us a couple of tools that we will need for this recording. And the first of these is the perspective grid tool. And if I click on it, and I think probably this is a good one to keep out of it on a regular basis if you have the option, because I've probably accidentally created a perspective grid more times than I've actually wanted to do it. But I can click on that, and there is my perspective grid. Now, let's say I want to draw a rectangle on the orange panel, and we can see it's not going on the orange panel because there's the grid part of the grid, and then there's also which surface you're working on. So right now we are set to work on the blue grid. That's the one that's selected up here, but I can switch to the orange grid, and then I can draw a rectangle on that one. And the same is true with the floor. I mean, obviously the roof of this is parallel to the floor, and there's two other walls if this was a complete cube, but those are parallel, so there are really only three surfaces we can select. And then I could draw out a rectangle on the bottom, and it will align to the grid as if we were drawing in 3D. And it doesn't have to be a square, of course. There's a circle that is aligned with the bottom of this grid. Now you have some control over the grid. This is the default grid as it comes in. You can change it up a little bit, and to do that you go back to your perspective grid tool, and you see handles, and I can move these. I find in practice it's a little bit hard to control, but I can move these planes to a different location. And if we swoop out of my frame, you can change where your vanishing point is. So this is just really the Illustrator equivalent of what everyone does in Drawing 1 when they sit in the hallways and have to draw a perspective. And it's just being a little slow and cranky right now. Oop. It drifted off the plane. But you can control to some extent what your grid is doing. It's being cranky enough that I won't try that again right now. Now, there are times when you may want to put something you have already created on the grid, something that is not in perspective. So I have a couple of things I might do. One is the type Star Wars, and I can move anything I've already created onto the perspective grid with the tool that's hiding behind the perspective grid, the type placement tool. So I'm going to select I think the blue plane, and then I'm going to select Star Wars, and all of a sudden we can move it where we want, but Star Wars is now in perspective. And I could do the same for this adorable little house I've drawn. I think I need to grab them both. Oh no, it's a group, so that should work. And I can move that onto the grid as well. And you can see that's a compound path, so we can see some things before it. And I wasn't super successful at changing the grid, but the other thing to know about changing the grid is that, let's just move that to the back again, is your shapes that you've already drawn on the grid will not change along with the grid. So it's probably best to establish the grid first and then start drawing if you're working with it that way. So that's a perspective grid, and when you want to, the grid will not print, but you can also go to View, Perspective Grid, Hide Grid, and we still have what we did in perspective. We're just not seeing the grid, and we can bring it back as many times as we want, or not. I will occasionally use it for drawing, but it's useful for like doing something isometric or getting that kind of style. Now, the other 3D tool is one that a number of students have found already, which is the 3D filter tool. And there are really two ways to use it. One is with a simple extrude. Well, there's three ways to use it. One of them I haven't figured out a use for yet. But for the extrude, actually, let's do a couple things to this first. One of the things about 3D is that it will, let's make my type yellow, and I'm also going to give it just a little bit of a red stroke. And that's way thicker than I need. That's the default 1-point stroke. I'm going to take that down to the skinniest stroke so that I barely see it. But if you give something a stroke when you make a 3D extrusion, the stroke will be the side of the extrusion. So now I've done this, and note that this is editable text. I can put my cursor into it anywhere and still edit it, and that's fine for 3D in this case. So let's go to Effect, 3D, and I will say Extrude and Bevel. And this is its default, but you can either visually move it to another angle. Its extrusion depth is always 50. But let's just preview that. And there we go, is the type in 3D. We can make the depth. This is like a very, it goes up big very quickly. So I often, when I use this, it's not very sensitive, or it is very sensitive rather, so I'll often type in a custom number. And then you get a smaller extrusion. So that looks certainly adequate. The other thing you could do with 3D, if you go to View, let's select something else, and you can stack these up on top of each other if you want, is do what's called a rotation. So if you had something like this is sort of a bottle shape, we could do a 3D revolve, and that will spin it by default all the way around its axis. You can also rotate, and that's the one I haven't found much of a use for, but I do use revolve occasionally. So let's go to revolve, and you see it's at the same angle. It is giving us by default a couple of other things we control, shading, but you can also have no shading or diffuse shading. They don't make the wireframe makes a difference. I generally just go with the default plastic shading, but that's certainly something you can experiment with. And let's just turn these down. I want this to look like a bottle that it's sitting on the table. So I'm going to take these all down to 0. And then let's preview that. And that's absolutely nothing like I expected it or hoped it to look, because it is revolving from the left edge. And really for the bottle shape, I want it to revolve from the right edge. So I'm going to say right edge. And it takes a minute to go through its thing, and there is a bottle shape more or less. And then if I wanted to, I could angle it a little bit. You see it go through the wireframe phase, and it'll be in space where you want it to be. So it could be part of a bunch of elements. 3D takes a while to render, especially as it gets more complex, but I've used it for things like as parts of illustration. I've used it to get various kinds of looks. So let's just say, okay, we'll accept that bottle. And I'm also going to do a revolve on this. So let's go to 3D. And I could just apply the revolve because that's the last filter I used. Nope, I think I want it differently. So let's undo that. I think I got a donut out of it, and really I want it to be a sphere. So let's go to 3D and start over. And I may have to turn it into half a circle. Yeah, I'm getting either a donut or a curve, so let's cancel. And let me get my scissors tool, which allows me to cut this in half. Okay, so now we should be able to get it. So let's revolve. And this time I do want it from the left edge, so let's preview it. And there's something that looks a little bit more like a sphere. So let's say that's good. But let's imagine I want this piece of art on it. And I want it to look like it's going around the curve. So I can do that, but first I have to turn it into something called a symbol. And we'll look at just a couple of other uses for symbols. And I think I have to bring down the window for that. So let's go to symbols. And there's a few default ones, and as with brush strokes and as with colors, there's symbol libraries you can open that have a whole lot of other elements that may or may not be useful. But in this case, I am going to, with this selected, I'm going to say new symbol. And it always defaults as a movie clip as the export type. It could be a graphic. It really doesn't matter. I tend to give everything names, so I'll just name this swoosh. With 2 O's. And click OK. And you can see it appears in my symbol panel right now. So let's go back to this sphere. And I'm going to attack it through the appearance panel, which basically everything I've done to change its appearance gets listed. So the color and the opacity, I think we talked about it, the appearance panel a little bit, but the other is 3D revolve. And I can click on it and it gets me back to my 3D revolve dialog box. And I'm going to go down here to map art. And here's all the symbols I have available to me because I haven't opened a symbol library. But I'm going to open swoosh. And let's just move it there. And click OK. And preview. And I think it's on the other side. Let's move it around. So there it is, and it is responding to the shape of the sphere. Now, if we did this, we could have done this with our extrude one as well, but it would have given us multiple surfaces for these hard edges. So there'd be, I could map actually different symbols for each of the sides. Once I was doing like a little cheap in-house illustration about the new streetcar in DC, and the streetcar at that point was way behind schedule, and so I used the symbols to map the streetcar art to the sides of just a simple rectangle, so that someone who had the print issue could make their own streetcar because the real one wasn't available yet. So that's the sort of thing you can do that can support a design goal with this. So we will say, okay, so as long as we have symbols open, I'm going to hide that bottom layer and look on the other one. And this is another tool that is not in the default space, but I do find it occasionally useful to use. This is the symbol sprayer tool. So I can, my same symbol is selected. So I can spray these symbols. If I was trying to, another way to create I guess a more organic texture. Because this is still selected, it is still responding to the symbols. It's a little bit hard to control, but if I want more density, I just have to make sure my symbols are not selected. And then let's delete that and get back to these symbols just so it'll be easier to see. So that's selected. And then there are all kinds of ways that you can manipulate them. There's a symbol shifter tool. You can move them around. There's a symbol sizer tool. So I can make them bigger, and I can hold my option key and make them smaller. Probably Alt on a PC. There's a symbol spinner tool. You can get them going in different distances. So this can be also a way to use symbols. This is sort of what symbols are normally used for. And the nice thing about symbols is that they are editable. So I can click on this and I can make it a 2-color symbol. And I am something that happens to me quite a bit by accident. It may have happened to you. Is what's called isolation mode, where suddenly you accidentally select one part of your art, and it puts you into this mode where that's all you see. In this case, to work on that symbol, that's what we want. And then I could say, actually, I should probably pick a different color for that one because the sphere is also cyan. Let's pick black for that. Now I can, if I like this, I can leave isolation mode. When you do a pattern, it's going to take a minute, I think, because I changed the symbol and there's a lot of places it's going to change. So it's just going to take a minute to apply it. And we see that the symbol is all updated. So the changes I've made to the update are made there. And I guess not at the 3D level, but it is made here. So that's, I would have to update that symbol manually. I guess the symbol is locked in once it's on a 3D object. So that's most of what I wanted to talk about today. I will look forward to seeing you in your crit group later in the week. And this was it for Adobe Illustrator. Next time we are moving on to Adobe InDesign.